Welcome again to United. I'm Pastor John Cupits, and I am filling in for Pastor Chris, who is on a short vacation to see a couple of his kids in California this weekend. I wanted to start off by just talking a little bit about my 3-year-old self. When I was 3 years old, my parents were forced to move. The landlord of the house we had been renting in the Bay Area decided they wanted to sell their home, the home that we were renting. So we had to look for another place, and we found one. It wasn't a big deal. But before we moved out, several people came by over the course of a few days to look at the house to see if they wanted to buy it. So my family had kind of staged the house that we were still living in, and were showing it to people. And I remember one day these two ladies came into our house to check it out, and one of them was a very, very large woman. And she was loud and happy and friendly and outgoing, and I have good memories of that short interaction with her. As a 3-year-old, though, I was in another room, and they were standing in the living room talking to my mom, and I came in from the kitchen to see our guests, because I'm always curious, like, who's here, and I want to see who's come. And I was astounded. My eyes grew wide, and I was impressed by the stature of the larger woman. And without knowing really anything, I couldn't contain my amazement. So I looked at the woman and said with absolute awe in my voice, "Wow, you are fat." Now, in my defense, I had just learned that word like a couple weeks before, and I was excited to be able to use it in the right context. But by the mortified look on my mother's face, I could tell she was trying to figure out how to respond. Like, she did not know what to do. And so I could tell that she was not happy with my observation, and it's kind of confused me, because I was like, isn't she? What's going on? I'm confused. I wanted to please my mom, and I could see she was not pleased, and I thought she would congratulate me for my understanding of the term. But that's not what happened, because when you're a 3-year-old kid and you say the right thing at the right time, people congratulate you. Like, you can point to a dog and say, "Dog," and your parents say, "That's right, very good, that is a dog." And for some reason that didn't happen this time. I expected my mom to say, "That's right, very good, John, she is fat." And she didn't do that, and I was very confused. She turned to the large woman with absolute horror on her face, and she said, "I am so sorry." And the lady laughed. And it wasn't a little chuckle. It wasn't a nervous laugh. Like, she reacted as though I had said the funniest thing she had ever heard. And I was just as confused by her reaction as I was by my mom's reaction, because I didn't say anything funny. I was just making an observation. And I was totally confused. These were almost opposite reactions from my mom and from the lady, and neither of them made any sense to me. One person is laughing her head off, and the other is looking at me like I just did something terrible. And so I was really confused. I didn't know what was going on. So after the ladies left, my mom explained the situation and the context, and I didn't totally understand, but I kind of got it, and the memory stuck with me for obviously to today. I'm sharing it with you. I was 3 years old, and I still remember this because it was so jarring and weird. And so, of course, I felt bad after I figured out what I had done, but that was a while. And so what I discovered is I discovered a social rule. I didn't know this rule that apparently everybody else knew. All the adults knew it. Sometimes you shouldn't just make those observations quite so publicly. And stating the truth, even though, it was true, some people get upset or angry, and some people laugh. And as a 3-year-old, I just was trying to apply a principle I knew. That was it. I was making an observation. But I didn't know the rules. And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking about knowing the rules. What are the rules? Once there was a man who understood all the rules, and he always spoke the truth, even if it made people upset. And I must admit, if you look at the person of Jesus and you look at the life and ministry of Jesus, he preaches a sermon called the Sermon on the Mount, which we've been going through on Sundays, and he breaks all of the sermon writing rules. Like, he does not do what you would expect him to do. He doesn't open with a joke or a cute story about when he was 3. He bounces all over the place, and you're not even sure, like, does he have a topic? What's his topic? He pulls out a couple of great illustrations, I'll give him that. But it's hard to imagine listening to his sermon with our modern sensibilities and experiences and really being able to follow him. But to understand the sermon of Jesus, you have to understand his context. He is talking to hundreds, maybe thousands of people from all over the region of Galilee and beyond. Most of them, if not all of them, are Jews. Religious Jews. They know their Old Testament. They go to the synagogue every Saturday. They know what the religious leaders say about following the law of Moses. So Jesus has all these people, and he has an opportunity to talk to them. So what's he going to say? Well, he wants to correct their misinterpretations and misunderstandings and erroneous teachings of the religious leaders of the day. So he tackles a whole bunch of them at once, and he kind of bounces around a little bit, and that's why. It's because he's addressing things that these people have been taught all their lives, and he's saying, you know the rules, you've heard the rules, well, let me tell you a better rule. And that's basically what he does. It's like Jesus is going through this list of rules, and then he's quickly and carefully re-explaining them. We don't know how long Jesus preached on this occasion, but it was probably hours, which is another rule that I have followed. I would not preach for hours today, okay? So you're welcome. But Jesus, he would just keep going, and he could do that because he's Jesus. We're going to cover one verse today, one whopping verse, Matthew 7:12. This is a rule. In everything, treat others as you would want them to treat you, for this fulfills the law and the prophets. That seems pretty straightforward. So do that. End of sermon. In conclusion, no, just kidding. I still have some time to fill. We read this and we think, well, this seems pretty straightforward, right? But we're going to break it down a little bit because we can. Let's start with this first idea. Jesus starts in everything. It's easy to gloss over that, but there's something profound being said here. For as long as humanity has been around, we have tried to come up with a single ethical principle upon which we can base our existence and our lives and maximize our corporate and individual happiness as a species. And we want, like there should be, right? You look around at the world and all the terrible things that are going on everywhere, and you think, if only there were one simple moral guideline that if everyone practiced it would make us all happy and would maximize human flourishing and produce a world overflowing with peace and love and unicorns and rainbows. Well, that would be nice. There was a moral philosopher named Immanuel Kant, you might have heard of him. He came up with a term for this type of moral guideline. He called it a categorical imperative, which is a really fancy way of saying a universal rule. Or, if you're a Lord of the Rings nerd like myself, you could call it one rule to rule them all. But the quest was to find a categorical imperative that would really work without any exceptions, caveats, or loopholes, and it would apply to everyone at all times in all places. What is that one thing? What is that one rule? So Jesus gives us one. In everything, treat others as you would have them treat you. We call it the Golden Rule, but there are some things we need to be careful about with regards to the Golden Rule. For example, Jesus never claims that this is the only rule we should follow. He does not say, if you treat others the way you would want them to treat you, you can ignore the rest of the law and the prophets. He does not say, if you treat others the way you would want them to treat you, you can stop going to the synagogue or church and no longer have to read your Bible. This principle is all you need. Jesus does not say that. In fact, the Golden Rule sounds like an extension of the second greatest commandment, which Jesus mentions later to an expert in the law. He tells this expert that the second greatest commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. It's a direct quote of Leviticus 19:18. Love your neighbor as yourself. That's very similar to treat others how you wish to be treated, just put into different words. Now, if you go back to Immanuel Kant, there are also similar ideas to be found in his works. The first idea is called the universal formulation, and it says, act only according to that rule, which you also would wish to become a universal law. In other words, if your moral principle is true, it has to be true for everyone, not just you, or not just you and your friends, or not just you and your country. It should be true for everybody, everywhere. So you can't ever say, well, in my moral principle, it's okay for me to lie, but not for them. Like, you can't do that. The second idea is called the humanity formulation, also known as the end in itself formulation. And that says, act only according to that rule. No, that's not the one. Treat all people, always, that's the one, as an end, and never merely as a means to an end. In other words, don't use people. Now, I have personally observed in my life that many people really only have one of these two moral orientations that are mentioned in this. Only two. You either see people as beloved creatures of a holy and loving God worthy of your self-sacrificial love, or you see people as tools, resources that you can exploit for your personal gain. Rather than being an end to themselves, they are the means to an end. In both cases, the universal formulation and this one, the humanity formulation, the highest rule is always aimed at serving something above and beyond myself, usually relation to others. It isn't about me, it's others focused. The golden rule from Jesus is the same way. It's applied to others. Treat others the way you would want to be treated. Now, we can apply these ideas to my 3-year-old self. I didn't know the rules. I didn't know how people wanted to be treated. I was still learning. And while in most cases it might be appropriate to point out something obvious, like that's a dog, the sky is blue, it's not a good universal principle to go around saying to people, you are fat, you're skinny, you're short. Like, is that a double standard? No, because it's how you and I want to be treated. The sky doesn't care what you think about it. The sky doesn't care if you think it's not blue. And the dog, you could actually go to your dog and say, you're fat, and he will not give you a look of horror or laugh at you. He will just say, okay, where's my treat? Like, that's all they think about. But for me personally, I own a scale, and I have a mirror in my bathroom. So I really don't need you to tell me what I look like. I don't need that. There are 2 people in my life who have earned the right to comment on my looks and my weight, and that's my doctor and my wife, and that's it. So we need to remember, treat people as an end. Do not treat people as a means to an end. And we're going to that was the in everything part. Now let's talk about this middle part. Treat others as you would want them to treat you. How would you want others to treat you? Do you ever think about that? Some of us get so busy or become so obsessed with pleasing others and just going through the motions that we don't even actually think about how we want to be treated. How do I want to be treated? That's a good question. I can't count the number of times that well-meaning people have said dumb things because they didn't ask this question. Instead of asking, how would I want to be treated in that person's situation, instead, a lot of times when somebody comes to us with a problem, our response is, what advice can I give to show them how wise and caring I am? That's different. That's a different question. Don't ask that question. Ask, how do I want to be treated? How would I want to be treated if I were in their shoes? But we just naturally, we try to turn it into something about us. How can I look good in responding to this person? And so we try to give advice to show them how wise and awesome we are. There's a big difference there. If you ever get into a conversation with someone who is clearly struggling with life, you may be tempted to give them helpful advice. On behalf of suffering people everywhere, stop it. At least take a step back first and think about it really long and hard. Because unless you really feel like you know exactly what they're going through, you are going to make things worse. I even had that happen to me this week in a good way, a positive way. I got a phone call from somebody who had some advice, and they prefaced it with, I don't want to tell you what to do. Maybe you've already done this. There were all sorts of disclaimers because they didn't want to just be like, you should do this. And it was really kind and thoughtful. And the way that they gave me advice was, I just wanted you to know this happened to me. It worked for me. If you want to try it, great. If not, I just thought I would let you know. And that was how the conversation went. And it was perfect because I was writing this sermon when it happened. I was like, wow, it's like you just demonstrated what I'm talking about on Sunday. There are good ways to give advice, and there are bad ways to give advice. I discovered, because I get online, my youth that I work with, they like memes, and so you might have noticed a few already. And there is actually a meme called the Bad Advice Cat. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but the bad advice cat gives bad advice. And there are at least 3 terrible ways that people do this. One is they say something that's almost irrelevant, like it doesn't help at all. And so that's the person that says, like, if something bad is happening to you, you just need to do this more or do this differently, and then all of your problems will go away. That's one. Another way is what I call the apples to oranges advice. Somebody's diagnosed with cancer and given 2 months to live, and you say, oh, I know just how you feel. My second cousin's neighbor's daughter's best friend was diagnosed with stage 1 cancer 5 years ago, and God healed her, and they're doing great now, so you'll probably be fine. It's not helpful at all. In fact, it's insulting. What happened in both of those situations is there's a failure on the part of the advice giver to put yourself in their place and ask the question that Jesus wants us to ask. How would I want to be treated if I were in that situation? When Jesus says treat others as you want them to treat you, there's an implication that you will know how you want others to treat you. And insensitive, non-equivalent comparisons in an effort to encourage people and let them know you care is not how you want to be treated. The second one that kills me is what I call the you're clearly stupid, so let me help kind of advice. This is when the hurting person is going through something that you think you understand, but you don't. It's something like, oh, you're having migraines? Have you tried ibuprofen? Really? That always helps me when I have a headache. Or, I hear you have terrible insomnia. Have you tried counting sheep? Have you tried sleeping pills? Have you tried earplugs? Have you tried a better mattress? Have you tried a better pillow? Have you tried knocking yourself out with a 2x4? That happened to me once, and I slept like a baby for 12 hours. We'll have you wishing for a 2x4 of your own when people give that kind of advice. Like, what? Those scenarios assume that the other person is stupid, and your advice is insulting and hurtful and infuriating. So let me just tell you, if you haven't thought about it, I'm going to tell you how you want to be treated. I think you already know this, but I'm going to tell you that you want to be treated with compassion and respect. You want to be treated as though you are intelligent, strong, capable, and caring. If you want to be treated as an intelligent, strong, capable, and caring person, then you should treat other people like they are intelligent, strong, capable, and caring. That's how you treat people. I would go a step further and say everybody in your life ought to be treated as if they are more intelligent, stronger, and more capable, and more caring than you. Think about that. The interactions you have in your life, with your family, with your friends, with your coworkers, do you treat them as if they are more intelligent than you, stronger than you, more capable than you, more caring than you? If you do that, you will be living the golden rule. you will be following Jesus' advice well. Assume that the person with insomnia has tried counting sheep before. Maybe the most appropriate thing is to offer to pray for them. Or ask them, is there anything I can do to help? That question is a refreshing question, and I love it when people ask me that question. Hey, let me know if there's anything I can do to help. Instead of, hey, you should do this. By asking that question, how can I help, it communicates two things. First, that you care about me, and second, you respect me enough to allow me to articulate my own needs rather than assuming that you know what I need. I believe almost all conflict, between well-intentioned church people boils down to this issue of not treating others the way they would want to be treated. If you've been on the receiving end of that, I am very sorry. If I did that to you, I'm sorry. I don't want to excuse myself and say, I've never done this to anybody ever. I know that I probably have. We've all done this to one another. Every one of us. We could look at each other and point fingers and say, you did this to me, you did this to me. Hey, you guys both did that to each other. Don't be too hard on the person that gave you bad advice or gave you insensitive advice. Remember, they are trying. They didn't realize how they were making you feel. Treating others how I want to be treated is a simple thing to say, but a really hard thing to do. So when I think about how I want to be treated, I would like you to have mercy on me when I say something less than intelligent or insensitive. And I will try to do the same for you. There we go. The last part of this verse is a whopper. This fulfills the law and the prophets. Pastor Chris, about a month ago, said, John, is it okay if you only have one verse? Like, do you think you can preach on a whole verse? And I looked up the verse and was like, oh, you mean the one that encompasses all the law and the prophets? Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can tease that one out a little bit. That the law and the prophets is a big section of the Bible, like more than half of it. And why does Jesus say this? Why does he say this fulfills the law and the prophets? Well, there's a technical answer about what the law and the prophets is, and then there's a more nuanced answer. When Jesus says this fulfills the law and the prophets, he's talking, of course, about the law of Moses, the first 5 books of the Bible. That's the law, the Torah, and also all of the prophets. We would call those the Old Testament. But in the Jewish reckoning at the time, there was a third section that Jesus doesn't reference called the writings. And the writings really were largely to explain the law and the prophets. Not entirely. They had some new stuff in there too, and there was a lot of prophecy in the writings. But really, when people in Jesus' day were trying to talk about what's right and wrong, they were focused on the law and the prophets. Now, it's beyond the scope of this sermon to tell you all about all of the law and the prophets. But I do think we can talk about what Jesus had in mind and summarize it. And the first important thing to know is, what does that word fulfill mean? I was surprised to discover that the word fulfill is not even in the text. It's not there. It's supplied by your English translators. Jesus actually says, in everything, treat others as you would want them to treat you, for this is the law and the prophets. That's the most literal way to read the Greek. This is the law of the prophets. So English translators have had all sorts of ways to try to add to that and make it make more sense, because grammatically it's awkward to say that something is the law and the prophets. But really, conceptually, it makes sense. It isn't just a fulfillment or a summary, as the NIV puts it. In the NIV, it says, this summarizes the law and the prophets. No, really, this is the law and the prophets. This is it. This is the heart of it. This is what makes the law and the prophets what it is. And that's important. There's no distinction between treating others as you would want them to treat you and following the law and the prophets. It's the same thing. Jesus said something similar to this when he was pressed by an expert in the law in Matthew 22. He says, and I'll read actually verses 34 through 40. Now when the Pharisees heard that Jesus had silenced the Sadducees, they assembled together. And one of them, a lawyer, asked him a question to test him. I love it when lawyers ask Jesus questions. Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law? Well, that's the question. And Jesus said, and you've probably heard it before, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. There you go. Then Jesus goes on. Oh yeah, there it is. This is the first and greatest commandment. The second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. And then he says this, on these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. Jesus refers to the law and the prophets together several times during his earthly ministry. And it's important that he's doing this because he's really reinterpreting and re-explaining what the rabbis and Pharisees and Sadducees and scribes are also saying. They're always talking about the law and the prophets, the law and the prophets, the law and the prophets. And Jesus is giving a corrective. Well, this is really what the law and the prophets are saying. Now, Jesus uses the word, in English, we see the word depend. On these two commandments depend all the law and the prophets. So again, I looked up the Greek, and it actually is more literally translated as hang. The law and the prophets hang on these two commandments. Now, semantically, you might think, well, that's the same thing, but I like the idea of hanging a little bit better because it's more dramatic. Like, I depend on my car to get me to and from places. I don't hang on it. If I'm hanging on my car, then that's way more dramatic. Like, don't let go. When you hang up your hat or your coat or your keys on a coat rack, like, you're depending on that hook to hold them up. And if it fails, everything crashes. Everything falls. It's useless. And that's what Jesus is saying. All of the law and the prophets hang on these commandments to love God and love people. If those commandments are forgotten or ignored or willfully broken, then every other rule, truth, and moral lesson from the law and the prophets will come crashing down. They will become useless and they're not doing any good for anyone. You have to start with loving God and loving others. Now, in 2024, I believe our society has a prevailing categorical imperative, that fancy word that means one rule to rule them all. And that is this: act in such a way as to affirm each individual's self-identity. That is the moral absolute, the highest moral goal in our culture today. And I believe there are two underlying assumptions which prop up this idea. And the first underlying assumption is that acting in such a way will lead to an individual's happiness and fulfillment. And there's a second underlying assumption that happiness and fulfillment are the ultimate good. There's no higher goal in anybody's life than individual happiness and fulfillment. Now, if those are your assumptions, then I can see why you got to that categorical imperative up on the top. But I don't agree with those underlying assumptions. So we're going to work backwards and fix these. The right underlying assumption is that holiness and giving glory to God are the ultimate good, the best good. Okay? The second is loving others gives glory to God. So, treat others as beloved children of God, as you would have them treat you. That's the Christian categorical imperative, the Christian rule to rule them all. All of the other rules have to follow under this. If I treat you like I want to be treated, that means I'm going to treat you according to reality, which gives glory to God. And if your self-identity doesn't line up with reality, I have a moral duty to challenge you on that. Because my greatest concern and my highest goal is not your happiness or fulfillment. My highest goal is your holiness and my own as well. I would rather that you be holy than happy. And I would rather be holy than happy. Now, it would be great if we could be both. That would be the best. But if you have to choose between holiness and happiness, choose holiness every time. There is an underlying assumption from Jesus when he says, treat others as you would have them treat you, that you know how you want others to treat you. There is an underlying assumption also that you are not 3 years old, because 3-year-olds really don't know this. They don't get it. They don't want to be treated the same way as an adult wants to be treated. In fact, if an adult treats you like a 3-year-old and you're an adult, that's not good. But Jesus wasn't preaching to 3-year-olds. Jesus' sermon was for studied, religious Jewish people. And by extension, it's for us as the children of God. So, sometimes when we follow the implications of the Golden Rule, we might encounter some controversial conclusions, ones that might even be controversial in the church. And I can give lots and lots of examples of those, but I thought I would just give one because I don't know why. Because I just feel like nobody ever talks about this, and maybe I should once. It's a free church, and we live in a free country. So my own outworkings of Jesus' moral principles might be compelling but not binding on you. And I say that because what I'm about to share is not the view of the church. It's not the view of the denomination. It's not the view of all Christians everywhere. It's just how I interpret the command to treat others as they would treat, as I would want them to treat me. And it's my view on capital punishment. Like I said, you're free to disagree with me, and I would love to have a conversation with you on this. But as a general concept, I believe it's good and critical to a healthy society in a fallen world that we have capital punishment. And not just because it was practiced in the Old Testament under the headship of God and the direction of God, but also for other compelling reasons. Because at the end of the day, my view of this follows the Golden Rule. If I ever become so depraved and deranged as to murder an innocent people, I believe that it is the responsibility of society at large to kill me. I think that's the right thing to do. That's how I want to be treated. Because I'm an intelligent, capable, autonomous human being with a free will. And if I used that intelligence and capability and autonomy to do something evil, I have forfeited my right to life. That's my decision. And I gave up my right to life by committing a capital offense. And it is a responsibility of the society in which I live to send a message to the rest of society that those actions are not okay. And the reason this is controversial in the church is because our immediate response is, whoa, John, what about forgiveness and mercy and all those things? And there's two answers. First of all, forgiveness does not mean that we don't give appropriate consequences. That's not what forgiveness is. In fact, forgiveness doesn't really even factor into the position, because I can forgive somebody and still say you forfeited your life. I appreciate the mercy question because I also think that such a penalty in a healthy society ought to be as fast and pain-free as possible. To me, that's where mercy would come in. Let's make this quick and as painless as possible. No, I don't believe that is condemning a person to hell. You're sending a person to God, and God decides. And I think that's where all of us, in my mind, ought to land on that, but I know we don't. I know we're all different in that. But I just thought, there are some ways that you work out the Golden Rule that might end up putting us in slightly different places. But the question that you must answer is, if I'm in that person's shoes, is that what I would want? That's the question that we might answer differently. Am I treating others the way I really would want to be treated? There are some evils that are so great that those who engage in them, historically, throughout the ages, have been put to death. And the Bible teaches us that the wages for sin is death. Sin kills. And Jesus, as the embodiment and fulfillment of the law and the prophets, says in the beginning of the Sermon on the Mount, this is Matthew 5:17, I have not come to abolish the law and the prophets. I've come to fulfill them. And so I go to my Greek lexicon. Did he really say fulfill? Here he actually does. He says fulfill in this verse. He has come to fulfill the law and the prophets. And the way that fulfillment works is different when related to the law than it is with relation to the prophets. Because in relation to the law, fulfillment means to cause God's will to be obeyed as it should be. Jesus has come to cause people to follow God's will as they ought to. And Jesus has come to fulfill the prophets by actualizing God's promises. God's promises given through the prophets receive fulfillment through Jesus Christ. And to see those promises of God manifest in reality, that's a fulfillment of prophecy and of the prophets. So Jesus said that near the beginning of his ministry, and then near the end of his ministry, on the very night he was betrayed, Jesus reminded his disciples of what this fulfillment really means. So at this time, I'm going to ask the ushers and the communion, and not the ushers, but the people doing communion this morning, the board members, and the musicians to come forward. And as they come up, I'm going to explain to you guys what we're doing. Here at United, we invite believers to celebrate and memorialize the saving work of Jesus Christ through the taking of communion. It's a throwback to the Last Supper, where Jesus told his disciples for the umpteenth time that he was going to die for our sins. And we do this in remembrance of the sacrifice of Christ and his love for us. In communion, we are reminded how Christ fulfilled the law and the prophets in the most profound way imaginable. So at this time, the worship team is going to lead us in a song, and we invite you to come up and take of the elements if you are a believer, and then take them back to your seat, and we will take them together.